Welcome to Raburn Series Premiere League Game of the Week number 2. I'm Blazinq. How this works is every week after all the matches are played, I go in our Discord and I let people decide what game I'm going to cover here so everyone picks their favorite game. Make sure to join our Discord, link is in the description below, to join the discussion there. Here we had another board 1 clash, two of the strongest players in the league. With the white pieces, FM FIDE Master Blazinq of Chess Family, representing CHC, the chess.com Comets, with the black pieces, National Master 1b31-O. This game had an insane opening. We follow the match between Caruana and MVL from the 2021 candidates for quite a number of moves. Let's see how that happened. We go into a mainline Sicilian Najdorf, where bishop g5, one of the sharpest variations, is chosen. There are a lot of ways for black to respond, but black chooses a version of the classic poisoned pawn variation where the queen comes down, grabs this pawn. Black wins a pawn, but they're lacking in development because they kind of wasted some time just moving the queen around, and it's going to continue to have to move around. e5 now pushes black's knight away after a trade, and white takes the chance to put their knight in the center. Now look at white's pair of knights just doing super well in the center. And already, black is in some serious danger, because if black doesn't play the right move, they could easily lose the game. For instance, if black tried to play knight takes e5, how would you counter that? Immediately, the move knight b5 wins the game. You're attacking the queen with your knight, and it can't be captured because of queen d8 checkmate. The bishop and the queen are both lined up towards that square. Black has no way to defend both threats. That's why black has to keep the knight on d7, preventing white's queen from reaching that d8 square. Instead, black plays queen takes a2, grabbing another pawn, gaining a tempo on the rook so it slides over, with the point being that black re-centralizes the queen, brings it back into the game, into the defense. Now, the knight is under attack, so the queen steps up to defend it. Black grabs a third pawn, and this is the insanity of this opening. Black has just gone around the entire board with their queen, just grabbing pawn after pawn, but white has a ton of development. White has 3 minor pieces out already, so black is going to have big problems getting their king safe. White goes for pawn to c3, just solidifying their position, stopping any bishop b4 check, defending the knight on d4. This is where we finally deviate from that famous game between Caruana and MVL. In that game, MVL played bishop c5. After bishop g3, queen d5, Caruana shocked the world with the stunning move, bishop c4. Just a total piece sacrifice. The queen can take the bishop. Fabi went on to win an excellent game there. Instead of that, 1b3 went for an improvement, trying to play bishop e7. Now, that's just a developing move. The bishop steps back once again. Queen slides over. And after knight d6, remember how I was saying there were might be some inexplicable moves? Well, this is kind of one of them, because I'm really not sure why black didn't take this knight. Because after king f8, they just hung their bishop on c8. I have no clue what that was all about, because now white is up a bishop. Now black still has 3 pawns for it, so technically material number-wise is even with the 3 pawns for a piece, but there was no need for black to give up that piece. Now comes bishop g5, queen gets attacked, and attacked. Then we start to see some trades. Knight d7, queen comes down to b7. After queen d5, I'd like you to look for a nice move here. Knight takes e6 is a powerful move. You're opening up your rook as a discovered attack on that queen, and you're putting the black king in check. So the only way to solve both of those problems is queen takes knight, but then the queen is gone from the defense of the rook on a8 after queen takes a8. Now king g8, and once again, I'd like you to look for another move for white here. At this point, we are literally up a rook for a pawn. So now it's just about simplifying the game. We need to convert this totally winning advantage in the best way possible. And so what that means is that we would really be happy to trade queens. The easiest way to do that is to go with knight d6 check. King moves over, can be met by queen e4 check, forcing the queens off the board, and I'm sure that white would be able to convert this advantage. Instead of that, rook takes d7 was played. This is still totally winning because it again forces a queen trade like this, but there wasn't really a need to sacrifice that exchange. Nevertheless, white still has the totally winning advantage of a knight for a pawn. We are going to see quite the defensive resistance put up by 1b3, but can Blazinq convert this win? After knight comes back to the center with knight d5, Now black pushes that pawn. Finally, castles on move 30. G6. Then black just trying to bring out their pieces. And I'm going to start to go a bit faster through this endgame for the most part because the game goes for quite a few more moves. But right here, something went wrong for white. Knight b5 was a bit of an inaccuracy because it allows this move rook e5. Attacking the pawn, you definitely don't want to push the pawn because you'll lose your knight behind it. But if you try to play rook c1 to defend, then you're hit by rook takes c5. Rook sack, but black immediately wins it back with this pin. Black would be left with 2 pawns for the knight, which would actually give them really good drawing chances. Instead, knight d6 is played, but that allows black to pick up a pawn. So once again, knight for 2 pawns. Black is getting closer, but some trades happen. So now we have rook, bishop, and 2 pawns versus rook and 3 pawns. This should be winning, but it's definitely not over yet. And remember, time control does have a 10-second increment, so neither player is in danger of flagging, but at the same time, they don't have a ton of time to come up with their plan. That being said, white starts on the right path, bringing their king into the game, as you should in any endgame, then improving the rook, putting it on the 7th rank. This f7 pawn can potentially be a big target if the bishop and rook can coordinate on that square. After the next couple moves, white starts to go with the wrong plan, because here there's a really important principle that when you're up material, you want to trade pieces to simplify, but you don't want to trade pawns, because if you imagine a scenario where all of the pawns are traded, so even if white wins a pawn, if every single pawn comes off the board, this is actually a drawn position. Black can survive king and rook versus king, rook, and bishop. It might not be easy all the time, and there have definitely been a lot of people who lost that endgame, but it should be a draw. So that's what black is aiming for. So with white's move g4, they're actually helping black get closer to that goal by trading that pair of pawns. Now all black needed to do was play for f5. They're sacrificing the pawn, but we reach this endgame, king, rook, and bishop versus king and rook. Once again, this should be a draw, but can black save it? There have been so many people who are unable to survive this endgame. I'm not going to talk too much about the exact defensive maneuvers in this game because there's just so much you could talk about. It's not going to fit in this kind of video, but I will say that black defended basically perfectly. And you'll notice that a lot of it, the idea from black's perspective, one defensive method, is to just keep this rook pinning this bishop. It's really annoying here. White does have the bishop there, yes, to shield them from the checks. That's what's so important from white's perspective. But at the same time, it's hard to make forward progress because the king is kind of stuck defending the bishop, and the bishop can't move itself. So even though black's king has been forced to the back rank, now we'll see that at some points black starts to adopt another defensive setup where they put their rook on their own 2nd rank to defend their king, as we see right here. This is the other idea. So black kind of goes back and forth between the two setups from time to time, as we'll see. White hasn't been able to make too much progress so far, but we're going to see that at some point, now the king has been forced to the corner. This is the point where black has to find only one move to survive the game. Every move except one loses for black. Can you find the drawing move? This is one of the thematic ideas in this endgame. The saving move is rook g6, and it was indeed found by 1b3. An excellent move. You can't take the rook because it's immediately stalemate. This is one of the most important patterns to know to survive this endgame. And with that, black forces the king away so that all of these checkmating threats no longer work. After king goes back to e7, now the rook moves to safety, and now rook h8 check was no longer a mate because the king can move away. Otherwise, if you made a different move, if you just made some random move like this, then the rook comes around here. And if you try to bring your rook back to the 8th rank to defend, then white's rook will swing around and try to give you a check from this perspective. So in the game, after rook g6, forcing the king back, white is unable to actually win this endgame. They go back for a couple more moves until finally agreeing on a draw just shy of the 100 move mark. If you enjoyed this game, make sure to like this video. And honestly, I have no clue how you could not enjoy this game. I mean, this game literally had it all. It had opening prep straight out of Super Grandmaster level with not one, but not two, 3 pawn sacrifices right out of the gate. Then we didn't have anybody castle until move 30. At one point, one side was up a full rook, and even then it wasn't so easy to convert. And at the end of the day, after a game that lasted 98 moves, almost 100 move long game. Finally, they were able to save this game. I mean, that's just insane. So show these players some support, like the video, and please subscribe to the channel.